The spring evening settled gently over Manhattan, with Central Park glowing like a dark green jewel below the towers of glass and steel. From the penthouse on Fifth Avenue, the view seemed endless, streets dotted with yellow cabs, pedestrians hurrying home, and the last traces of sunset still holding onto the western sky. Inside, the air felt heavier than it should have. Irving Hicks stood at the polished bar, a crystal glass in hand, his reflection mirrored back by the tall windows. At 65, Irving had the bearing of a man who had weathered storms most people could not imagine. He had built HickTech from a cramped Brooklyn garage into a respected company that served clients across the country. Tonight should have been a celebration. He had finally reached the point where he could let go selling the company for $43 million to Titus Grant, a competitor who understood the value of clean code and honest work. That money meant freedom trips to Japan in cherry blossom season, quiet afternoons in Paris, cafes, evenings in Tuscany where time slowed with the rhythm of vineyards. He poured a Manhattan cocktail, careful with the measure of rye and sweet vermouth, dropping ice cubes into the glass with a soft clink. It was Simon's favorite drink. His son paced across the living room, agitation clear in the restless movement of his hands. "Dad, you're destroying our future," Simon said, voice-tight words sharp enough to cut through the quiet hum of the city outside. Irving placed the cocktail on the table. "Simon, I've made my decision. I'm selling HickTech. Next month, the paperwork will be complete." The words landed like a weight. For weeks, Irving had rehearsed them, but speaking them aloud to his only son felt like lifting a curtain on years of tension. Simon froze, shoulders stiff, face pale under the warm light of the penthouse lamps. "This is our family business," Simon protested, grabbing the glass but barely tasting it. "You can't just throw away everything." Irving's expression remained calm. "Family business." His voice was low, deliberate. "Simon, you never learned how the software works. You enjoy the perks, not the responsibility. You arrive late, leave early, and spend afternoons at the golf course. That is not building." In the corner, Ida scribbled notes in a small pad, her green eyes flicking between father and son. She spoke softly with an edge Irving had long recognized. "Irving, maybe you should think this through. Perhaps there's a compromise." Irving placed his glass down firmly. "I have thought it through. For 3 years. My decision is final." The silence stretched, filled only by the hum of the refrigerator and the faint traffic sounds 20 floors below. Simon began pacing again, hands slicing the air as though he could conduct the outcome to his liking. "What about my position? What about our future?" Irving's gaze did not waver. "Our future. No, Simon. I built this company. You collected a paycheck. That is the truth." The words struck harder than Simon expected. His face flushed. He slammed the glass onto the table, spilling amber liquid across the Persian rug. "You're 65, not 90. You could run this company another decade." "I could," Irving admitted, voice steady, "but I will not. I've given my life to HickTech. Now I want to see the world. The pyramids Tokyo, the beaches of Thailand. I will not spend the years I have left chained to emails and board meetings." Simon's steps faltered, but Ida rose, her notepad held close as if it were a shield. "Surely you can find a balance, Irving. Keep the company, hire a CEO, let Simon take more responsibility." Irving almost smiled at the suggestion. "Responsibility." He shook his head. "Simon is not ready to manage even the sales department. Investors would never trust him with millions, not when he owes $17,000 on credit cards and struggles with his mortgage." Simon's jaw tightened. His words stumbled, but his desperation was clear. "Then give me time. 6 months. I can prove myself." "You had 12 years. Simon Irving replied, sadness in his tone, more than anger. 12 years, and you never tried." The room seemed to shrink around them. The chandelier's light glimmered on framed photographs along the wall, Sarah Irving's late wife holding a young Simon in her arms. Family gatherings when smiles felt less forced. Those memories pressed in on Irving, reminders of how quickly life had changed, how distance had grown. Finally, Simon collapsed into the leather chair by the fireplace, his voice breaking. You're ruining everything." Irving poured himself a scotch instead, the stronger drink steadying his resolve. "No, son. I'm choosing something better. Freedom." The quiet stretched again, this time heavier. Ida snapped her notepad shut, her smile quick but shallow. "Of course, Irving. We understand completely." Yet Irving knew they did not. Behind her careful mask, he glimpsed calculation. Simon stared out the window toward the city lights, his reflection ghostly in the glass. $43 million, Simon muttered almost to himself. That's life-changing money. Irving leaned back, watching him. "It is," he said gently, "and it will change my life." The clock in the corner chimed 9. Outside, the city moved on with its own rhythm, joggers circling the park, couples strolling beneath blooming trees, children laughing in playgrounds. Inside, the Hicks family sat in silence, the distance between them wider than ever. The following evening carried a different kind of anticipation. Irving dressed carefully in a navy suit, silver tie, and polished leather shoes, the kind of outfit that marked both dignity and celebration. Tonight was not about contracts or boardrooms. It was about family. He hoped that perhaps over fine food and wine, the sharp edges of last night's arguments would soften. The Bella Vista restaurant glowed warmly as he approached through Central Park. Lanterns strung across the terrace cast gentle circles of light, and the sound of a jazz quartet drifted from inside. Couples walked hand in hand under the budding trees. For a moment, Irving let himself believe this could be a new beginning, a way to bring his son and daughter-in-law closer after years of strain. Simon and Ida were already waiting under the awning. Simon's hug felt firm, almost too firm, and Ida greeted him with a smile that was perfectly polished, her lips brushing his cheek. The hostess led them through the dining room to a terrace table with a wide view of the park. Manhattan's skyline sparkled beyond the treetops, a reminder of the city Irving had given his life to, building a company within. Champagne arrived quickly. Glasses clinked under the string lights. "To you, Dad," Simon said, voice carrying just enough warmth to mask the tension beneath. "You deserve happiness." Irving returned the toast, and to family he added because part of him still wanted to believe the bond remained. The conversation at first was gentle. Ida asked about travel plans, her voice rich with interest. Irving described Japan in spring, the philosopher's path in Kyoto temples, surrounded by blossoms Sarah had once dreamed of seeing. He spoke of Paris cafes and the rolling hills of Tuscany, of wine slower than the rush of New York. As he talked, his eyes softened, recalling the scrapbook Sarah had kept filled with clippings and notes about places they would visit someday. Ida leaned in, nodding at every detail, though her pen never left her small notepad. Simon, by contrast, shifted in his chair, fingers drumming against the tablecloth, glancing at his watch more often than at his father. When the jazz quartet began a slow tune, Ida touched Simon's hand. "Darling, shall we dance?" Her tone carried a gentle insistence. Simon hesitated, looking briefly at Irving, then stood. Together they walked toward the small dance floor near the bar, their movements elegant but oddly rehearsed. Irving remained at the table, sipping his orange juice slowly. The terrace buzzed with quiet laughter and the soft clink of cutlery, the kind of background hum that marked prosperity without ostentation. For the first time in many months, he felt a lightness in his chest. Perhaps he thought this was what success was truly, for moments of peace, not profit. A shadow fell across the table. A man in a dark suit, posture straight and expression serious, stood just beside him. "Excuse me, sir," he said quietly. "My name is Mike Riley. I'm security for the restaurant." Irving looked up, puzzled. "Yes." Mike leaned closer, voice steady. "While you were watching the musicians, I saw that young man pour something into your juice." His eyes flicked toward the dance floor where Simon's hand rested on Ida's waist. The words landed with a force that made the room tilt. For a moment, Irving heard only the muted notes of the saxophone, distant and unreal. What he whispered. "I'm afraid it's true," Mike said gently. He used a small container. I saw it clearly. Irving's gaze fell to the half-finished glass of orange juice. The ice cubes had begun to melt, innocent and ordinary. His throat tightened. This was his son, the boy he had taught to ride a bicycle in Central Park, the young man whose college tuition he had worked late nights to pay. Mike's eyes searched his. "Do you want me to call the police?" Irving forced his voice to steady. "No, Not yet. A scandal would tear everything apart, headlines splashing betrayal across every paper. The family name would become a spectacle. He needed time, and above all, proof. Mike gave a small nod. I'll keep watch. If you need me, signal. He stepped back toward the railing, posture alert. Irving's mind raced. He could not drink the juice, but neither could he leave it untouched in plain sight. With careful hands, he reached into his jacket and pulled out the small pill bottle he carried for his heart medication. While his eyes remained fixed on Simon and Ida, swaying to the music, he poured some of the orange liquid into the bottle and screwed the cap tight. Evidence discreet, portable, undeniable. The remaining juice he tipped casually into the decorative plant beside the table as if watering it absent-mindedly. The soil darkened, swallowing the liquid. The glass stood empty, innocent once more. Just as he slipped the pill bottle back into his pocket, Simon and Ida returned. Did you enjoy the music? Ida asked brightly, her dress swaying as she sat down. Beautiful, Irving replied, voice calm, though his pulse thundered. Simon glanced at the empty glass. Where's your juice? Dad finished it while watching you dance, Irving said smoothly. Thirsty work celebrating. For the briefest instant, Simon's smile faltered, his eyes flicking to Ida before recovering. Good. Then let's order dessert. Irving placed 3 crisp bills on the table instead. Another time. Tonight has been enough. He stood kissing Ida's cheek and embracing Simon with arms that felt heavier than stone. I love you both, he said softly, words they could not understand the weight of. Simon reached for him. Dad, wait. Stay. Enjoy the music, Irving replied, stepping back. I can find my own way home. As he walked toward the restaurant's interior, Mike appeared briefly at his side. Smart thinking with the plant, he murmured. Evidence preserved, threat avoided. Irving's nod was small but firm. The air outside struck cool against his face as he left the terrace. Behind him, the jazz continued. Couples danced, and his only son sat at a table where a glass of poison juice no longer waited. Morning light washed Irving's home office in a soft gold, the kind of light that made old wood glow and photographs look newly alive. He sat at the mahogany desk that had held so many plans and numbers and let his hand rest on a framed picture of Sarah. In the photo, a younger Irving stood with her in front of a tiny garage in Brooklyn, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. That laughter felt close for a moment, as if it had only paused and might begin again. He drew a long breath. The pill bottle lay on the desk, its orange content catching the light. Evidence, yes, but also a line he had never wanted to cross with his only son. He gathered what he needed with the steady rhythm that had built a company from nothing. Blue folder for chain of custody notes. Small notepad for the times of drop-off and pickup. A clean envelope addressed to himself so the lab could return documents without delays. He put on the same navy suit he wore for serious decisions. Not because he needed to impress anyone, but because the fabric reminded him that he still stood on his own 2 feet. When he locked the pill bottle in a padded pouch and slipped it into his briefcase, the act felt formal, almost ceremonial, like placing a delicate instrument in a case. Morrison Analytics occupied a quiet floor on the Upper East Side, where the elevator whispered and shoes met polished stone. The receptionist spoke softly and, with respect, used his name and took the form without a flinch. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison invited him into a small consultation room with a glass wall that revealed a world of stainless steel and focused motion. She did not waste his time with flattery. She spoke about gas chromatography and mass spectrometry in plain language, then repeated the key points in even plainer words as if she could see the ache behind his calm. "We will treat your sample like a life depends on it," she said, and Irving nodded, grateful for the steadiness of her voice. He signed where she pointed. He handed over the pill bottle. She placed it in a labeled bag and noted the time with careful handwriting. The room felt colder when the bottle disappeared into the lab. Outside, the city sounded normal again. Buses sighed to a stop. A dog walker whistled. Irving hailed a cab to Midtown because the next task belonged to documents and signatures and the quiet authority of the law. Harold Steinberg met him in a corner office lined with old casebooks and newer photos of grandchildren. Harold had known Irving through mergers and contracts and the quiet sorrow of Sarah's passing, and that history showed in the way he stood up from his chair and did not ask unnecessary questions. "I need to modify my will," Irving said. The words were even not bitter. The changes were direct. Remove Simon and Ida. Allocate the bulk to medical research and community health. Dedicate named funds to scholarships for nurses in honor of Sarah and the years she worked double shifts, while Irving wrote code at a folding table. Harold listened, wrote and read the draft back aloud the way careful people do when every word matters. Irving signed. The notary signed. It felt like closing a heavy door that would no longer swing open by accident. On the way home, he stopped for a late lunch at a small deli that had known his order for years. The counterman greeted him with a smile and asked after his day. Irving asked about the man's daughter who had just started community college. They spoke about spring weather and how Central Park would be full by afternoon. Irving left a generous tip and carried his sandwich to a quiet bench where the air smelled like warm bread and new leaves. He ate slowly, listening to the city breathe, and thought about the shape of love when it is not returned. Love becomes a boundary, he decided. It becomes the decision to protect what is good, even if protection looks like distance. Late in the day, the lab called with a brief update. Preliminary results indicated the presence of a highly toxic compound consistent with cyanide. The full report with charts and verified numbers would be ready within a day, signed by Dr. Morrison herself. The voice on the phone was neutral, but Irving heard what he needed in that neutrality. Facts were coming, and facts would not tremble. Night came easily, and with it the kind of quiet that lives high above the street. Irving stood at the window and let the city lights soften his face. He thought of Simon as a boy, the time they toppled a sandcastle together and laughed until they fell over. He thought of Sarah holding that sandy child, lifting him with a kiss to the forehead. He let those pictures settle in his chest like stones placed to hold down a cloth on a windy day. He was not made of anger. He was made of memory and choice. The next afternoon he returned to the lab, where paper carried the weight of truth. Dr. Morrison walked him through the report, each page precise. Concentration, lethal range, method chain of custody signatures. She placed a copy in a folder with a pale blue cover and handed it to him with steady hands. He thanked her in a voice that stayed clear, even as something inside him loosened like a knot beginning to give way. From there, he walked to Harold's office again, not because anything else needed signing, but because it felt right to close the loop. He asked Harold to store a certified copy of the report with the will. He asked for a letter template in plain language that could be read without a lawyer present. Harold drafted, Irving approved, and a new envelope waited on the desk, thick with words that would not bend. Back at the penthouse, he cleared a place on the coffee table and laid out the pieces like a quiet display. The lab report, the notarized will, the letter he had written in his own hand, simple and exact. He read it once, then placed it inside a heavy envelope and warmed a small wax seal over a candle flame. The wax made a smooth red circle that looked almost old-fashioned, and maybe that was the point. Some endings deserve ceremony. He could have hired an investigator. He could have called the police. He could have chosen to create a storm loud enough to fill every corner of the city with gossip. Instead, he chose a table on a terrace and a dead plant that needed no dramatics to tell the truth. He chose to speak plainly and walk away. He called the restaurant. The host recognized his voice and offered the same terrace table for the following evening. Irving thanked him and asked very gently that the plant near the table be left as it was. The host promised. Irving set down the phone, then opened a drawer and took out the old travel notebook. He turned to a page Sarah had once marked with a paper ribbon, a list of places where she had written someday. He rested his hand on the page until the paper warmed under his palm. Evening deepened. He ate simply in the kitchen, washed his plate, and wiped the counter dry, a small act of order in a day full of larger ones. He set an envelope on the entry table, then moved it to his briefcase, then set it on the entry table again. Finally, he smiled at himself and tucked it carefully beside the lab report. The choice was made. The words would be said once and not repeated. When he switched off the lights and the room fell into a soft gray, He looked out over the park and thought about how a life can change in the time it takes to sip a glass of juice. He did not feel grand or tragic. He felt ready. He whispered a thank you to Sarah that only he could hear and walked to the bedroom with a steady step, knowing that tomorrow night they would know the truth. The evening carried a charge that Irving felt in his bones before he even stepped through the restaurant's doors. Bella Vista glowed with its usual warmth, lanterns along the terrace, the hum of polite conversation, the saxophone inside drifting through the spring air. But beneath it all, Irving sensed a weight that belonged to him alone. Tonight was not about fine food or champagne. Tonight was about truth, and he had prepared for it with the care of a man who had once written code line by line until a system held. He arrived early, briefcase in hand, and allowed the maitre d' to lead him to the terrace. The same table waited crisp white cloth, silver cutlery, a view of Central Park just beginning to darken into evening. Beside the table stood the decorative plant he remembered. Its leaves, once green, were now curled and brittle, the soil dry, the damage plain. Irving rested his palm lightly on the back of his chair and drew a breath that felt like a beginning. From his briefcase, he removed the sealed envelope. He set it carefully beside his water glass. Not hidden, not dramatic, simply present. Inside lay the words Simon and Ida would not want to hear, written in his own hand, sealed in wax final. He sat and allowed himself a moment to notice the park children finishing their play joggers in bright shoes, a pair of horses pulling a carriage slowly along. The world carried on untroubled by what was about to unfold above it. 10 minutes later, Simon and Ida appeared at the terrace entrance. Simon wore a dark suit that seemed to hang too heavy on his shoulders. Ida's dress shimmered under the lantern light, her smile sharp, but her eyes restless. They approached with the air of people who believed the evening would belong to them. "Dad, you look well," Simon said, surprise flickering across his face as though he had expected something different. Irving gestured to the empty chairs. "Sit." His voice was calm, even carrying neither anger nor warmth. They obeyed, arranging themselves with the small choreography of people who wanted to control a scene. "How are you feeling?" Ida asked, voice honeyed. "Simon was so worried after you left so suddenly." Irving lifted his hand slightly, indicating the plant beside the table. "Interesting what poison can do to living things, isn't it?" Their eyes followed his gesture. For a heartbeat they said nothing, taking in the brown leaves, the brittle stems. Simon's face lost its color. "That plant," Irving continued softly, "was watered on Tuesday night with orange juice. The same mixture you intended for me." Ida's hand tightened around her napkin. Simon's fingers twitched as though searching for an escape. Irving reached for the envelope and held it lightly between his hands. "This contains everything you need to know about your attempt. Mike Riley saw what you did. Dr. Morrison confirmed cyanide. My will has been changed. You are no longer my heirs." He placed the envelope in front of Simon. "Read it." Simon fumbled with the seal, his hands trembling. The wax broke with a small crack that echoed louder than the music inside. He unfolded the letter and scanned the words, his lips moving silently, his face crumpled, mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. "What is this?" he whispered, though the answer was already before him. Ida leaned over, eyes darting across the page. Her posture stiffened, her mask slipping. She opened her mouth to speak, but Irving's voice cut through. "You chose greed over family. You wanted my $43 million. You wanted me gone. Instead, the money will go where it can do good research scholarships, life. You are finished with me, and I am finished with you." Simon pushed back his chair, half rising, desperation spilling into his movements. "Please, Dad, wait." "I can explain." Irving stood. His movements were measured, deliberate. He looked at his son, then at the woman who had encouraged him down this path. For a moment he saw Simon as a boy holding a baseball glove too large for his hand, eyes bright with the hope of approval. That memory hurt, but it did not change the truth. "Goodbye, Simon," he said quietly. "Goodbye, Ida. Whatever future you thought you had with me ends here." He turned and walked toward the entrance. Behind him, voices rose Simon, pleading Ida, hissing words too low to catch, but Irving did not look back. He passed waiters carrying trays of pasta and wine couples leaning close over candlelight strangers who had no idea they were sitting beside the collapse of a family. At the door, Giuseppe the manager inclined his head. "Will you be returning, Mr. Hicks?" "No," Irving replied. "My business here is finished." The air outside felt different, sharper, like the first breath after a storm. He paused at the edge of the terrace, looking across Central Park. Darkness had fallen fully now, the lamps glowing along the paths, the city alive with its usual rhythm. For the first time in many months, Irving felt lighter. The weight of $43 million, the burden of responsibility, even the ache of betrayal, all of it loosened as he stepped into the night. The morning after the confrontation felt clean, like rain had passed in the night and left the city rinsed. Irving woke before the sun pushed fully over the buildings and made coffee in his quiet kitchen. The ritual steadied him, the click of the grinder, the warm steam rising, the first sip that carried a nutty sweetness. He stood by the window while Central Park brightened slowly, joggers beginning to thread along the paths. When he dressed, he chose a simple blazer and comfortable walking shoes, the kind a person wears when he intends to take his time. Freedom, he thought, should fit like a good pair of shoes. He walked the park's east side loop at an easy pace, giving the morning his breath and his patience. Dogs trotted with bright eyes, tugging owners who waved politely. A groundskeeper lifted 2 fingers in a friendly salute. By the boathouse, a woman practiced slow stretches, the kind that make a spine look newly young. The ordinary kindness of strangers touched him more than he expected. Ordinary is a blessing, he thought, and let his shoulders soften. Near the Bethesda fountain, he found a bench and sat with a view of the water. The air smelled faintly of damp stone and early blooms. He took out his phone not to scan news or emails. Those habits had already begun to lose their grip, but to type a simple message to Mike Riley. "Thank you for your alertness and steady head," he wrote. It mattered. "If you ever need a reference, call me." Mike's reply came a minute later. "Just doing my job, sir. I'm grateful you're all right." Irving smiled and slid the phone back into his pocket, feeling the quiet weight of gratitude settle in. He left the park near the Met and caught a cab downtown to a building whose lobby held the soft echo of purposeful footsteps. The Foundation's office was modest, but bright, with framed photos of community clinics and research teams on the walls. A director in her 50s with kind eyes and a handshake that felt honest led him into a conference room. She did not make a show of his donation. She asked about outcomes. They spoke about toxicology research and how to get more training into the hands of local hospitals, about scholarship funds for nursing students who worked nights and cared for families during the day. Over tea, they drew a sketch of a program in Sarah's name that would sponsor 2 scholarships a year for nurses who planned to serve in community clinics. When Irving signed a letter of intent, he felt a lighter version of the solemnity that had colored the previous day's signatures. This was a document that opened doors instead of closing them. At lunch, he chose a diner with a long counter and red vinyl stools, the kind of place where the grill talks and a bell rings when a plate is ready. The waitress called him Han without embarrassment and topped off his coffee without asking. He ordered a turkey club and coleslaw and ate half of it, then asked for a box. He left a generous tip not as a performance, but because he could, and because he remembered Sarah saying that people who work on their feet all day deserve the kind of kindness you can count. On his way out, he held the door for a man pushing a stroller with a sleepy toddler. The man nodded thanks and said, "You have a good one." Irving meant it when he answered, "You too." The afternoon he reserved for small tasks that meant more than their size. He went through the apartment and set aside a few items. 2 watches. He no longer wore a set of cufflinks still in their box. A leather briefcase he had carried for 20 years to send to a charity that resold goods to fund after-school programs. He labeled a carton with Sarah's handwriting samples, the grocery list she had stuck to the fridge on a neat little pad, then put it back carefully. Some things belong where memory reaches for them without thinking. Close to 4 o'clock, his phone lit with Simon's name. For a long breath, he considered letting it go to voicemail. Then he answered because avoiding a call felt like giving fear too much room. Simon's voice came through thin and stop and start, as if the words scraped his throat on their way out. "Dad, I'm sorry for last night. We were upset. Things got out of hand. He paused, the silence clumsy. Then the shift Ida and I, well, we need a little time to adjust. Maybe you could help us sort some things. Maybe with a bridge. You know, money. Just for a while. Irving listened without interrupting. The apology never landed. It hovered somewhere near the surface and evaporated before it touched ground. He pictured the boy with the oversized glove again, then the man at a terrace table where a poisoned glass had waited. He spoke gently because gentleness was not weakness. Simon, I wish you safety and growth. I truly do. But that door is closed. We will not be discussing money. We will not be seeing each other for a time. I hope you use this to find your own feet. The line hung open, as if it might net some other outcome out of the air. Finally, Simon exhaled sharply, a sound more of frustration than sorrow, and said, Fine, if that's how you want it. The call ended. Irving stood for a moment in his quiet living room phone still in his hand. He let the silence settle again, not as a punishment, not as a triumph, but as a boundary. Love, he thought, remains love, but it will not finance harm. He needed air. He took the elevator down and walked to a small corner cafe where the barista learned names by the second visit. The bell over the door gave a cheerful ring. Afternoon light slanted across a case of muffins and lemon bars. A man near the window read a paperback a woman typed on a laptop covered in stickers from national parks. When Irving ordered fresh orange juice and a small coffee, the barista said, Great choice, and meant it. He carried his drinks to a two-top by the wall, set them down, and watched the street through the front window. The orange juice shone like a little sun in a glass. He lifted it, took a long drink, and let the clean tang spread through him. He set the glass down carefully and felt nothing but simple refreshment. He opened the folder the foundation director had given him and reviewed the outline for Sarah's scholarships. 2 students a year to start with room to grow if the fund performed well. Preference to those who worked nights or cared for family members. He pictured the nurses who had held Sarah's hand during her chemo treatments, their calm voices steadying both patient and husband. He wrote a short note to accompany the formal documents in memory of Sarah Hicks, who believed that work done quietly and well is its own kind of courage. Evening drew its gentle curtain across the city. Irving returned home with a paper bag crinkling softly under his arm, a sourdough loaf from the corner bakery still warm. He cut a heel, buttered it, and ate it standing at the counter, the simplest dinner and the most satisfying. Then he cleared a space on the dining table and unfolded a large paper map, the kind travel sites have tried to replace, but never quite can. The map crackled as it opened, a sound like a promise. He laid a small notebook beside it and clicked a pen. He traced a line from New York to Tokyo, then to Kyoto, where he wrote, "Start here, cherry blossoms. If the season is right, tea ceremony, quiet walks by the canal." From there to Paris, with a note to find a cafe on a corner where nobody minds a man reading alone. Then to Florence, and south, through the Tuscan hills, a villa for a week, where he could sit at a wooden table and write a few pages each morning before the heat gathered. He added a stop in a small town in the Midwest, where Sarah's cousin had once lived. There was a grave to visit and a letter to leave. He circled each city with slow, deliberate ink as if blessing the route. His phone buzzed with a text from the foundation director, a photo of a whiteboard where her team had just sketched out timelines for the scholarship application. Under it, she had typed, "We're honored to carry Sarah's name." He wrote back, "I am honored. You will." The apartment glowed in lamplight. On his desk, a frame with Sarah's picture caught a stripe of gold and made her smile look almost in motion. He set the map back on the table, took a breath, and drew a steady circle around Tokyo. Then he wrote a date beside it. It felt like signing his own permission slip for a life that did not answer to quarterly reports. The phone rang once more. The screen showed an unknown number, then went quiet. Irving let it pass. He closed the notebook and placed it atop the map, anchoring the paper with the weight of plans. Outside, the park lamps flickered on a dotted necklace of light curving through the trees. He stood by the window and listened to the hum that had been his lullaby for decades. Tomorrow, he would purchase the ticket. Tonight, he would rest his bones like a man who had earned it. He turned off the dining lamp and left the map open in the soft spill from the hallway, its pale lines shining just enough to be seen from the doorway. The circle around Tokyo seemed to glow a little on its own. He reached over, drew a neat box around the date, and with a calm hand underlined it once. Then he set the pen down, as if closing a gentle door. The next morning opened with the kind of light that seemed to forgive. Irving walked down to a corner cafe he had passed countless times but rarely entered. The bell above the door gave a cheerful ring as he stepped in. The smell of fresh coffee and toasted bread wrapped around him like a familiar blanket. A barista behind the counter smiled in recognition, even though this was only Irving's second visit. "Good morning, Mr. Hicks. Orange juice and a coffee again." He returned the smile. "That sounds just right." She poured the juice into a tall glass, the liquid glowing bright in the morning sun that slanted through the window. Irving carried it to a small table by the wall and watched the street outside. Delivery trucks rumbled past children with backpacks, hurried behind parents, and a man in a suit stopped to buy a newspaper from the stand on the corner. Life moved steadily, in rhythms too often missed. Irving lifted the glass of orange juice, held it for a moment, then took a long, unhurried drink. The clean citrus tang spread through him without fear, without shadow. It was simply juice, nothing more. He set it down with a small smile, grateful for the ordinary. Later that morning, he met with a travel consultant in a modest office not far from his building. Maps covered the walls, dotted with pins and notes from countless clients who had gone and returned. The consultant, a middle-aged man with a gentle voice, asked about Irving's dreams rather than his budget. "I want to start in Tokyo," Irving said, tapping a circle he had already drawn on his own map. "Cherry blossoms if I'm lucky with the season. Then on to Paris for the cafes Sarah always wanted to see, and Tuscany, where time moves at the speed of wine." The consultant nodded with understanding. Together, they built an itinerary that began with Japan in the spring, wound through Europe in the summer, and allowed weeks of quiet in small towns rather than rushed days in crowded capitals. Each booking felt like a step towards something he had promised himself long ago, but had always postponed. In the afternoon, he returned to the foundation's office to finalize documents. A notary witnessed his signature on the scholarship fund, the ink flowing steady across the page. The director placed a hand over the file. "We'll carry Sarah's name with honor," she said. Irving's eyes softened. "That means more than you know." Walking back through the city, he noticed details he had once skimmed past: the way tulips bent slightly in the breeze outside an apartment building, the laughter of teenagers spilling from a pizza shop, the rhythm of a saxophone played by a busker near the subway stairs. These were not headlines or contracts. They were the texture of life itself. At home, he packed carefully. The suitcase stood open on the bed, half filled with clothes chosen for comfort rather than appearance. On top, he laid Sarah's photo in its frame, wrapped gently in a scarf she used to wear on cool evenings. He placed the folder from the foundation beside it, a reminder of the legacy already set in motion. Evening descended slowly, lights flickering across Central Park like scattered stars. Irving poured himself a glass of water and stood by the wide window. The city moved below, families returning home, couples walking arm in arm, cyclists weaving along the park paths. For decades, he had watched this view with a mind filled by deadlines and balance sheets. Tonight, he watched with an unburdened heart. He thought of Simon and Ida somewhere in the same city, grappling with the loss of what they had tried to take. He felt no triumph, no hunger for revenge, only a quiet wish that they might one day understand the cost of greed. For now, he let them drift away from his thoughts like leaves carried off by wind. On the table near the door, his passport rested atop the printed itinerary. A ticket to Tokyo lay tucked inside the departure date circled. He set his alarm for an early hour, then closed the suitcase with a firm click. Before turning off the lights, Irving opened the travel notebook Sarah had once kept. Her handwriting filled a page with a simple word: someday. He touched the page gently, then whispered into the quiet room, tomorrow. The apartment fell into soft darkness. Outside Central Park glowed with honest shadows and unbroken paths. Irving lay down knowing that for the first time in decades, the future waiting for him was not another contract or negotiation, but a journey chosen freely. Freedom at last had arrived not with applause, but with stillness. The story closes not with noise or triumph, but with the quiet of a man standing at his window suitcase by the door, ready to step into a life he chose for himself. What began as an evening meant for celebration became a journey through betrayal, truth, and finally release. In the end, what lingered was not the bitterness of loss, but the gentle weight of freedom, the kind that comes when dignity is held firm even in the face of disappointment. The lesson is simple and lasting. When we stand calmly for what is true, we discover that strength does not need to shout. Irving did not fight his son with anger, nor did he return poison with poison. Instead, he chose clarity, compassion, and resolve. From betrayal, he built a path that honored his late wife and opened doors for others in need. In that choice lies the reminder that our greatest victories are often quiet ones. Just as a lamp in a window can guide someone home on a dark night, an act of steady kindness and courage can carry us and those around us through the most difficult passages of life. So perhaps we might take a moment to ask ourselves, where in our own days can we choose dignity over anger, patience over haste, or truth over easy silence? The story of Irving's last chapter is not only about money or family, but about the deeper inheritance we each leave behind, the inheritance of integrity, of compassion, of love that protects even when it must also let go. If this story has touched something in your heart, consider sharing its warmth with someone who may need it. Sometimes all it takes is a word spoken gently, or a reminder that justice can arrive softly, yet firmly, to change the course of another's day. Like the blossoms that return each spring, hope and truth often bloom quietly, but their beauty endures.